Courage and honor, cousin.
Into the fires of battle, unto the anvil of war.
Hello, and welcome to Warhammer 40k's Grim History from Beyond. I'm Zekthar.
And I'm Yuxin.
And we are the chroniclers of all that was, and all that will be in the 41st millennium. We've seen the rise and fall of many empires, and this month we will be talking about the Plankonious Wars.
Indeed, Zekthar. The Plankonious Wars. A war that began in 997.M41, when Big Toof invaded the Plankonious system. And the invasion is not going well for the Imperium.
Quite right, Yuxin. It has only been a year, and Big Tooth has already laid waste and conquered the 12 worlds of the Outer Rim. Yet, he's growing impatient. Although the call has gone out to every greenskin in the segment of Pacificus, unfortunately, the Cadian reinforcements are getting closer too. At this point in his campaign, Big Tooth could either A, strengthen his position on the Outer Rim and wait for Imperial reinforcements, or B, go for the jugular and rip the heart out of the system, Plankonious herself. To Big Tooth's orcish brain, this really isn't a choice. I mean, after all, smash to eat. But one thing that bothers him was its proximity to the home world of Wolfhounds, Germanica. To take Plankonious, Germanica had to fall. But how to accomplish such a feat in so little time? Using some knowledge he acquired from Guilliman's Codex Astartes, which, I might add, kept from his time in captivity, decided to use a tactic that the Astartes had used against his kind for thousands of years.
Good heavens! You mean to tell me that we have an orc running around the galaxy with the complete works of Guilliman's Codex Astartes?
Mm-hmm.
Most chapters of the Space Marines don't have that.
I know. It's weird that most Space Marines don't actually have that, but it was very nice of the Death Watch and the Ordo Xenos to give him the book. Anywho.
More the Ordo Xenos than the Death Watch, right?
Yeah. Anyways, like I was saying, he needed to divide the Imperial forces. If he took the majority of his to Plankonious, he should be able to draw most of the Imperial forces to the capital. Then he could send a second, smaller, yet significant force to Germanica after they had emptied most of their barracks to assist Plankonious. After drawing it up on the wall of his ship, he smiled. He was quite pleased with his simple plan. His smile quickly turned to a frown, though. Who's he going to send in this second? Not PGT. Not after Mary Jane. I mean, after all, Big Tooth hadn't done much to help him win the scrap of Grok's run, and PGT had been pretty full of himself. Big Tooth didn't want to give him any big ideas. Perhaps Claw Squigwig? Yes, that was the answer. Squigwig was rather cunning for a snakebite, and worked well with Big Dwarf. He'd send these two, along with Jock and the Gobbler, to keep an eye on them both. He should probably send Stone Tooth Jack with them, too. Big Tooth honestly didn't like having the monster orc around. He made him feel small, and he didn't want to give him, or those that followed him, any ideas on who should really be running this. And so it was in 550.998.M41. Bob Big Tooth took the majority of his forces and began his invasion of Plankonious. To repel the attack, the majority of all the Imperial forces centered on the capital planet, including the remaining 1.2 million Vostroyans that remained in the system. The Imperial force...
There were still 1.2 million of them? I thought they were all spread out on outer planet training.
They were. But after Mary Jane fell, the generals of the Vostroyans began to realize the severity of the situation and began to pull their forces back to the inner ring of planets, combining their forces so that they could make a better stand. Better to be able to do something rather than die by 1,000 cuts.
So they left most of the Outer Rim to their own devices.
Correct. Along with the Vostroyans and all their armor and artillery, they were joined by 500,000 Cadians. Pedro Cantor and Johann Sebastian both agreed that Plankonious could not fall, and mustered the majority of their forces and made planetfall. Surely this was not big enough to defeat the second company of Crimson Fists, along with 5 whole companies of Wolfhounds. But little did they know that they were falling right into Big Tooth's plans.
Very true, brother. But before we get to Germanica, a little background of the Wolfhounds.
Ah, that sounds like a good idea, actually. Tell us about these Wolfhounds.
Ah, yes, the Wolfhounds. They're a successor chapter of the White Scars and part of the 21st Founding, also known as the Cursed Founding. Now, what other...
That's the same one that had, let's see, like the Lamenters, the Minotaurs,
the
that
Black
group,
Dragons.
Right? Yeah, all the ones anyways that there was something always just a little wrong with them. Right?
More than a little in some cases. I mean, having a giant bone spike sticking out of your arm, it's a little bit more than a little.
Or having the worst luck in the galaxy, which that one I always thought was kind of interesting. And then you have for the Minotaurs just like berserker mode.
It's like, okay.
Like, okay, all right. Well, what is, just real quick anyways, what is the Wolfhound's genetic flaw? I'm assuming they have one because they're part of this cursed founding, yes?
Well, they have inhuman eyes.
Well, huh?
Okay, first off, the shape of their pupils are reptilian in nature, and the rest look like orange flames coming off of them.
Oh, okay, so their eyes are like glowing embers. Very much like a salamander's, but more like because they're reptilian, actual salamander.
Let's see how I can better explain this. Okay, so remember that Terran 42 movie trilogy, Lord of the Rings?
Yes, I did. A great set of movies. Although I will say anyways, the extended versions, if you're going to watch all of them, plan for a long day.
Well, the Wolfhound's eyes look like the eye of Sauron.
I'm guessing a little bit more reptilian, though.
Well, if you've looked at
it was kind of weird.
Sauron, it's pretty reptilian looking.
But they're on fire. Okay. I mean, that definitely falls outside of the realm of human looking, but are their eyes really actually on fire? So it's like when they get pissed off, do they like inflame or something?
No.
No. But that would have been cool.
But they can see heat signatures with the naked eye.
Oh, so they see things in like a thermal spectrum, like a snake.
Now you're catching on.
Or the predator.
Yes.
Right.
Now, just like their gene sires, the White Scars, the Wolfhounds do love fast attack. Against this stereotype, though, is that they also like their tanks. Not necessarily the most fastest moving things, obviously.
Okay, just out of curiosity, anyways, have they actually modified now? Now, I'm not talking about during the Plankonious Wars. I'm assuming they've modified now, anyways, to using a lot of what the Primaris Space Marines use. The floaty tanks, the ones that go a little bit faster.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I mean,
now they do.
They don't have
At this point in time, they didn't have any of that.
He's been around anywhere.
Yes.
Belisarius Cawl hadn't shown up yet, even though he had been around for the last 10,000 bloody years. He waited until now to go, well, I know how to make land speeders or grav bikes and all the rest of this crap. Anyways, sorry. I figured I'd say it before you did. Sorry, go ahead.
Getting back to this, in fact, their desire to hit hard and viciously is so great that if you looked up words like blitz or blitzkrieg in the Warhammer 40k dictionary, you would find the Wolfhounds. Unfortunately, every single interaction in every battle we've discussed, they don't have any armored units. This would be because they don't really lend out a tank or two for a single unit, or in the case of this battle, they were all taken to be used by the forces that went with their chapter master. As for how they see humanity, they do see the Imperial Guardsmen as inferior in regards to combat capabilities, which, let's face it, is understandable. They are frickin' Space Marines.
We're no better than the Imperial Guard. Are you retarded? Sorry, go ahead.
I can bench press an autocannon. Can you even lift it? No. See?
Yeah.
At the same time, they do respect the guardsmen for doing their duty despite this. They also see the value of coordinating with the Imperial Guard and even take into consideration the opinions given by officers of the Guard. They also feel that, much like salamanders, that the ultimate goal should be to safeguard the people. Unlike salamanders, they do weigh whether or not they should help or protect a group of humans.
Oh, okay. There's a few questions I got here about that. First off, anyways, you're not telling me, anyways, that they actually, like, listen to orders that the Imperial Guard give them, right?
Now, they take them into consideration.
Okay.
So
fair enough.
if they find something and, like, they didn't think of it beforehand, but this actually makes sense,
Gotcha.
yeah,
Okay.
I'll do that.
So they're a little bit more open-minded than, dare I say, like, for instance, the Black Templars, or...
Or other people that just see them as,
pretty much
you're
any
just...
Space Marine unit. Okay. And I guess my second question is that so they're very much, anyways, like, defenders of humanity, but they don't take it as far as the salamanders do?
Well, as we know, the salamanders would go through, like... I guess the best way to put it is, the salamanders, it's to protect humanity no matter what, which means, let's say there's a group of civilians that are under fire and they would lose like 20 people just to save these 100. The Wolfhounds would probably go, it's 100 people. Unfortunately,
they got slaughtered.
100 versus 20 of us that can probably save thousands of other people.
Okay, so they're a little bit more
Pragmatic, is that the correct
pragmatic,
term?
yeah. A little bit more, I guess, more Space Wolfy then,
Yeah.
right? I mean, because the Space Wolves, anyways, do think of themselves as defenders of humanity, but like you said, anyways, if there's like 100 civilians and the Tyranids are surrounding them, they're not going to spend their whole regiment to go in there and try to save them. They just wave. So,
I mean, they'd probably use it to their advantage, but they wouldn't, actually.
yeah, fair enough. Okay, so they're kind of along the same lines as then, like, for instance, like I said, anyway, Space Wolves or the Blood Angels, or along those lines, where they think of themselves as more defenders of humanity, but they're not, like, going to go out of their way to sacrifice their chapter for humanity.
Of course, at the flip side, they'd also side with more of what the salamanders would do would be, instead of risking the people that you're protecting to hopefully win a goal, they would rather protect the people. Kind of like in Battle of Hell's Reach.
Uh-huh.
Remember where the Black Templars are like, we should go to the enemy and kill
Right.
their warlord, and the
Awesome.
Salamanders said no, because that would leave the civilians.
Okay, so they have more of a defensive out goal as opposed to... So they have a more defensive outlook?
When it comes to protecting civilians that are like... Yes.
Okay, so I have another question then, anyways.
They're
So they have a
accessible.
defensive outlook, anyways. How does that work, anyways, with the whole concept that they need speed and they need to go fast? Because to me, those two things, anyways, are kind of combat each other.
Well, one of the things that helps is, in most cases, they aren't sent to protect, they're sent to attack.
Right, but at the same time, there's normally like civilians that you need. Like, for instance, Armageddon is a perfectly good example, where you have the salamanders who were there anyways, and quite frankly, the best place to put them, for Dante to put them, was actually to protect the supply lines, because that's what they're best suited for.
Right.
And then he, anyways, took his Blood Angels and went for the jugular, while he used the Ultramarines to, defend the front line. So, I mean, to me, anyways, it seems like this is kind of a we hate ourselves. That's right. It's just like, we need to stay and defend the civilians. I want to go fast. I've got this bite. We can go charge the enemy. But we have to watch the civilians. Oh. Maybe that's why they like tanks better. Because tanks aren't nearly as fast. So, and they're far more protective. But you still have a little bit more mobility with them.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So there you go. That's why. Because I answered my own question. This is how it works. That's why they enjoy tanks. Is because while they still anyways can move across the battlefield rather quickly, you still anyways have this opportunity anyways to be a defensive unit.
Well, that plus, if you think about it, it's a great way to break through a siege to get to civilians.
True.
We're gonna attack this city. All of a sudden, boom! What the?
And
yes, comes through with its bulldozer. You know.
Well, okay. Before we move on to Germanica, real quick, I do have one last question about the Wolfhounds. So I already kind of described, anyways, how the Wolfhounds came to the Plankonious system in our first box. Go ahead and check that out, the Oxidine debacle. But my question is that, like I mentioned in the first Vox, and we kind of are going to get into this anyways of the Crimson Fist, why are they there? I know that there's this oath that they kind of show up, and for a long time anyways, the Crimson Fist would show up every 100 years at Germanica because the Crimson Fists are a fleet-based chapter, but then once they got Ren's World, they kind of bounced back and forth. So what was it anyways that made them anyways have this oath with the second founding of the Imperial Fist?
So it took place on a planet called Pt3, where the Crimson Fists were fighting a uprising, which is debatable whether or not it was chaos related or just because some people were pissed off at the Imperium for having to pay too many taxes. And unfortunately, due to the fighting, they ended up waking up they found out there's a Necron Tomb World is what happened.
I think it still is, actually.
Yeah.
I think it's in the Ultima segmentum, but yeah. Well, that's not good.
And so the Necrons started waking up. The Crimson Fist got almost entirely wiped out. In fact, it got down to about a squad plus their chapter master, Rodrigo Diaz.
Ah, yes.
And then the Wolfhounds ended up swooping in and just running over people with their tanks and then pulling out Rodriguez Diaz along with his men, and they fled because, it's
not Rodriguez, it's Rodrigo.
Oh, Rodrigo.
Yes, Rodrigo Diaz. Actually, one of the cooler people in the Crimson History, actually. Very little is written about him, though, in the Imperial catalogs. But yes. I actually do know this story. It's actually fairly interesting. But yeah, since that point, as far as I remember anyways, they've kind of been buds. Very much like the Blood Angels and the Salamanders. But, enough about the Wolfhounds for right now anyways. Why don't you tell us about Germanica a little bit?
The planet of Germanica looks similar to Terran 42's Europe, starting from France to Germany. It's densely forested in many areas and has extremely harsh winters, yet a short and surprisingly fantastic summers. The winters suck, though. Well, like temperatures consistently being at 30 below freezing. In fact, this year, Lieberweiz was currently in the harshest winter they had ever recorded.
Oh, that sounds terrible. But real quick, what's Lieberweiz?
Lieberweiz is the land that pretty much all of the important stuff is located. Things like the airport, the Wolfhounds fortress, where the majority of the civilian population was located, major supply depots, etc. This particular battle takes place at the city of Bastogne, which is actually the crossroads to all the important places that the orks need to take to achieve victory. Now, some may be wondering why the Wolfhounds had only left one company, being the 10th Company, under Captain Wilhelm W. Abrams, on Germanica.
I've got kind of an idea, but why?
Well, you see, despite Germanica being the homeworld of the Wolfhounds, it wasn't really considered a high priority target since the main export of Germanica is lumber. The other reasons why there were so few Wolfhounds is because the majority of the companies were, like my brother mentioned beforehand, at Plankonious, and to be on the safe side, the rest were spread amongst the different highly populated worlds. I also must mention, a small contingent of Crimson Fists are on Germanica as well, including our old friend, Lieutenant Juan Fernandez.
Oh, okay, first off, why is Juan Fernandez here? And secondly, last I remember anyways, he was a sergeant. Why did he get promoted?
He was at Germanica to get his new mechanical arms and to have time training with his new group of men, which include 4 units of Devastator squads and 1 assault squad, giving him a total of 30 men. As for the promotion, it was basically a field promotion based on seniority, because he was the highest ranking senior.
He's kind of the only guy that survived Oxidine, yes.
And he was a sergeant and everybody else wasn't, so we can't have a sergeant in charge of 30 people. But these are not the only brave men guarding the planet. There's also a meager force of Imperial troops, some 9,000 of the Guard.
Indeed, brother. But don't let their small size fool you. They are some of the best human fighters in the Segmentum Pacificus.
Sure they are, but why aren't they fighting in the Sabbat Wars, or even closer, on Plankonious?
A couple of reasons. The first being, they aren't a fighting force. Well, not anymore. This group consists mainly of Harkoni Warhawks, Catachan jungle fighters, and Ratlings, all of which are on Germanica as military advisors and trainers. They were some of the first to arrive, and their commanders impressed Johander so much, in fact, that he requested they stay on his world and do their training there, which the advisors readily agreed to. They train incoming Bastroians and Cadians on alpine combat, para-dropping, advanced marksmanship, melee combat, night maneuvers, and for the officers, something that isn't taught very often to the Ostra Militarum, scattered tactics and kill team maneuvers. All the while they were trained by the Wolfhounds in fast attack tactics, mobile infantry maneuvers, and who better to teach close quarter combat and marksmanship than an astartes? Over the course of the last decade, these 9,000 men and women, who were already great soldiers when they arrived, became masters of the craft. And their officers were not just advising incoming commanders, but being hailed with long-distance boxes from the Sabbat worlds to advise in battle planning. Of the commanders, the one who is on call the most with the Sabbat worlds is Colonel Maxwell Taylor, commander of the Warhawks, Germanica. Now, ironically and strange enough, Maxwell isn't originally from Harkoni, but a small planet in the Ultima Segmentum known as Kansas.
Really? That's weird. What's he doing leading paratroopers?
Well, part of his planet's tied to the Imperium, he was a captain of an artillery regiment, and like many distant planets was trained and armed with Cadian gear. Forming a small fleet, they grouped up with some actual Cadians and Harkoni Warhawks, and made for the planet of Ranix, a planet that was in a desperate civil war between Chaos cultists of Zinch and the Loyalists. By the time Maxwell Taylor's fleet arrived, most of the world had been consumed by chaos. The original plan set by the Cadian generals was to do things the usual way, hammer the planet with the ships around the capital city, then send in the infantry and armor, followed by the artillery. It was a tried and true method, but the Harkoni Warhawks didn't like it. The way they fought was in small tactical teams, and this was a good way to get ground to pace before they really could be utilized. They suggested they drop in first behind enemy lines that surrounded the capital, break them up a bit so the regular infantry had an easier time getting to the capital. With a growl, the general of the Cadians gave the Hawks a nod, and they were off. Things were going according to plan, and Taylor, being part of the final drop with his artillery, was ready to descend to the planet when they heard the alert. The Warhawks were calling in on their Vox in a panic. Something was coming. a massive swarm of monsters and cultists led by a massive bird thing. There was nothing anybody could do to help them, and the rest of the Austrian military forces had already landed. The only troops that hadn't dropped were Maxwell's, a group of basilisks and wyverns. Instead of having his forces drop where they originally were supposed to, Maxwell had a different idea. Some would say crazy.
Oh no! He didn't have the Tetrarch heavy landers drop his artillery in support of the Warhawks, did he?
No. Of course not. I mean, that would be silly. There's no way a Tetrarch could land in such a small space.
Good.
He dropped them from the sky, using the boatload of grab chutes.
He did what?
Yeah, you heard me. He dropped in the wyverns first as mobile support. Then, getting into the command basilisk, dropped with the rest of them.
He dropped with the basilisks?
Well, yeah. I mean, how else was he going to get down?
Gah.
Anywho, dropping with the aircraft, Maxwell's stomach lurched as the wind whisked around him, as he and his artillery raced towards the ground. Then the grab chutes kicked in, and they began to float down. Grabbing his binoculars, he scanned below him for his wyverns and the warhawks. It wasn't long before he found them hard-pressed by the servants of Singe. They seemed to be holding their own until he watched in awe as a massive bird monster stormed towards the front, slicing through the armor, infantry, and even buildings with each blow of its bladed spear. It was huge, too, at least the size of a 2-story building. It screeched with laughter as the warhawks hit it with everything they had, and even when the wyverns fired their mortars into the beast, it barely did anything. Thinking quickly, Taylor ordered his wyverns to fall back and urged the general of the warhawks to do the same. He then barked orders to his men manning the basilisks to shut off the grab chutes at the front of the basilisk and charge the back chutes to hold the weight. This swiveled the guns on their landing platforms 90 degrees and...
Yes, we know. He's going to shoot the Lord of Change with the basilisks. This is so stupid.
Why? I mean, maybe you don't understand what he's doing. So what he's done is he's got, these boarding platforms that have tied to him these basilisks, right?
Right.
And he shut off the grab chutes to the front of them so they swing down so the guns are pointed towards the ground. That way he can aim the gun at the Lord of Change. And he's got a whole battalion of basilisks anyways ready to do this.
That doesn't change the fact that this is stupid.
Well, what makes you think this is stupid?
Well, so long as he hits with the first one, maybe, but after that...
It's this thing called gravity.
Yeah.
Well, regardless of what we think, when he gave the order to fire, 2 things happened. The first was the most of his men aimed true, and hundreds of very large shells rained down on the Lord of Change's head and around it. Needless to say, the surprised demon was mulched into paste as it screamed and disappeared back into the warp, along with most of its foul lesser creatures.
Let me guess. Like I said, all his guns went spinning off into space, eventually crashing into the ground, killing all of them.
Ironically, Taylor thought of that problem, well, right before he had his basilisks fire. Barking a warning out to the rest of his airborne, he slid down the platform to the nearest shut-down chute. He fired it off just as the basilisks fired. And before you ask, yes, he went spinning into oblivion, but his tampering with the grab chutes slowed their descent, and while it wasn't the greatest landing, they were able to land.
Shocking.
Yes, well, this couldn't be said for the rest of his regiment. Of the basilisks that had dropped that day, 90% of them would turn to slag.
How did he not get executed?
Well, when he linked up with the wyverns and the warhawks, they had in fact survived. If their commander, a General Bernard Montgomery by name, had been killed before Taylor had shown up. The commissar of the warhawks, a William C. Marshall, had been hearing the angry reports from both the Acadians and the Kansas Guard. They wanted Taylor's head on a platter for such a reckless stunt. If the commissar had been part of any other regiment, he would have followed such orders without complaint. Yet the man knew that the only reason he drew breath was because of this crazy Kansas commander. The effect of killing the Lord of Change had much more of an effect than those at the capital could see. With the greater demon destroyed, the cultists broke and ran, and the lesser demons were already dissipating back into the warp. Were going crazy and were easy pickings for the Warhawks and the Wyverns. When Maxwell Taylor rolled his beat-up basilisk into the Warhawks' forward operating camp, Marshall had an honor guard ready. He explained the situation to Taylor, and without pause, the captain handed the commissar his sidearm, ready to meet his fate. With a grim smile, the commissar buttoned a pair of Colonel Imperialis to his shoulders and said loudly, "Oh, Governor, unfortunately our beloved General Bernard Montgomery has fallen in combat. Thank goodness Colonel Maxwell Taylor was here to keep the men in line, yes?" Glaring around at both the Harricani Warhawks and the Kansas artillerymen, he added, "And for the crazy bastard captain that dropped his men into the fight. He died in a terrible fiery crash, squished under his own basilisk. Yes?" Both the Harricani and the Kansas boys knew what the commissar meant, and with a knowing grin saluted the newly minted Colonel Maxwell Taylor. Now, ironically, his outside-the-box thinking has served very well with the Harricani, and it wasn't long before he had made a name for himself, which dropped him here in the Plankonious system. Colonel Maxwell Taylor is a rather eloquent man, but his voice resonates with years of experience and can harden into a well-placed bark that could even get an Imperial fist to move. Colonel Anthony McAuliffe, on the other hand, is quiet and speaks little. Yet when he does, the men under his command hustle to follow his orders, and all it takes is a growl to those that aren't under his command to either do his bidding or flee. Now, Colonel McAuliffe has been mistaken for an ogre, which makes sense due to his massive size. A veteran of many years, he's as tough as an orc boss and twice as ugly. As opposed to Maxwell, the reason Colonel McAuliffe isn't in any sector of the galaxy doing what he does best is because nobody in high command can stand him. Much like most catacomb commanders, he has a very little respect for the higher echelons of rank. In fact, McAuliffe has a saying, "Show me a man that's got no grim or calluses on his hands, and I'll show you a lad who doesn't know shit." Because of his inability to play nice at the upper brass, he was left on Germanica to train soldiers, until he either died, or someone remembered him, and by that point perhaps he might have learned a little humility. Anybody planning on calling him will learn immediately that A, he hasn't learned an ounce of humility, at least to prim and proper noble generals, and B, ironically, he's actually very content where he is.
Really? I figured you'd be itching for some excitement.
Well, he would be, except for he gets to play with the Space Marines.
Play?
Yes. That would be close quarters combat training with the Space Marines of the Wolfhounds. He has yet to win, but he has impressed the Wolfhounds because he has gotten close. And they wouldn't be surprised if in another few years he might take a Wolfhound to a tie.
You're kidding.
Yeah. Well, strength, he's actually pretty close to an astartes, but he's really lacking in the speed. And his mind is sharp, and every day he tries something different, something outside the box. Regardless, the last advisor is loathed by those coming in to be trained, but is adored by the trainers, her squads, and even the stoic astartes of the Wolfhounds betray a smile when she walks by. And that would be Rattling Chief Piper Quickfoot.
An abhuman? What is a ratling doing training troops of the Imperium? Not that I mind. Quite frankly, ratlings are some of the best snipers in the galaxy, let's face it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just most people think of them as less than human. The fact that the Ecclesiarchy has not declared them as chaos mutants is a miracle to me.
Well, the reason she is here training is the exact reason the Imperium keeps them around. She's just too good at her job.
Okay. What do you mean? Ratlings are known for 4 things: stealing, cooking, eating, and marksmanship. So, what is she known for?
Yes. She's known for that.
Yes?
She's very good at all of those. And that's what she teaches. Piper and Ratlings are very well known for their abilities to sabotage and steal things, especially when it comes to the enemy. If you want great tasting food on the front to boost the morale of your soldiers, nobody does it better than Piper. And marksmanship? Why, Piper could give pointers to a Vindicary assassin.
Okay, surely you boast on her behalf. A Vindicar?
Okay, maybe not give lessons to, but perhaps outshoot or shoot as well as a Vindicar. Much like Larkin of the Tanith Person only, or Alwix Vradenrik.
Really? Wow, that's impressive.
Yes, well, she and her fellow Ratlings...
About 500 of them, if I recall right.
Yes, well, they were all rather comfortable training Imperial Guardsmen on Germanica. But this leads us to the actual invasion.
Right. Well, I'll get to the initial invasion here in a second. But before we start with that, I have one question.
Oh, and that would be?
Ratlings are known for stealing not just from the enemy, but their friends as well. Has Piper's folks tried stealing from the Wolfhounds? And how did it go?
Well, ironically, it has become a strange game for them.
That requires an explanation, I think.
Well, it all started when Piper herself was caught stealing foodstuffs from the Bastien. She was brought to Johander and he demanded why she would steal from his chapter. The stubborn Ratling lied and said she would never, and nobody there could accuse her of stealing anything. The captain of the 4th Company, named Oscar Wilhelm, said he in fact watched the theft and swore on the Emperor's life that what he saw was true. This caused much grumbling amongst the astartes, and Piper, seeing her demise was imminent, scrambled up a Terminator's armor and boldly spoke, saying that Wilhelm couldn't have seen her steal something. She was too good at it. She could prove it. Johanna responded with the question of the judging hall. How? Rushing towards the chapter commander, she produced a deck of cards. Shuffling them quickly, she dropped 3 jacks. The jacks of diamonds, the jack of clubs, and the jack of spades. The only one with one eye. Folding them at a 45-degree angle, she shuffled the 3 jacks across the ground in front of the Johander. So fast that the cards became a blur. When she was done, she stepped back and said that if the leader of the Wolfhounds couldn't find the one-eyed jack, how could an underling of him possibly see her sleight of hand?
I believe this game is called on Terran 42 3-card Monty.
Mm-hmm.
But this game is a ruse.
Hmm.
Normally the card to guess is a queen and a jack, and as it is shuffled, the queen slips up a sleeve. Or
True.
a variation of it, anyways.
Yeah. Okay, so you know 3-card Monty, right? So the concept is, anyways, is that you get people to bet on if they can find where the queen is. You shuffle the cards around, and normally what ends up happening is the person that is shuffling the cards ends up actually making the queen disappear.
Yeah,
so there is no
palming it or
palming it, slipping it up the sleeve, whatever, kind of thing. And like I said, anyways, the game is normally fixed because the game is normally played against humans. But Piper was playing against an Astartes, and Johander caught the move that made the card disappear up her sleeve. As soon as it happened, his hand moved faster than lightning, seizing her by the wrist with a growl, and slipped his fingers into her sleeve and produced the card. Holding it aloft, he declared boldly that his Astartes could recognize her stealing. After all, he had found her cheating. Tossing the card to his fellow Space Marines, he drew his power flail, and was about to pass judgment when he heard a noise not often heard in his hall. Laughter. Turning to address the strange gesture, his second captain, Belmont Beethoven, held the card for him to see. It was not the one-eyed jack at all, but a joker. Glaring at the rattling woman that he held aloft, she simply smiled at him and asked if he knew where the one-eyed jack might be. After all, 3 cards remained on the ground. Shocked, Johander looked down at the 3 remaining cards. He could have sworn the one-eyed jack slipped up the girl's sleeve. If it wasn't there, then where was it? Johander pointed to the last place he saw the card, before he thought he saw it sneak into her sleeve. "That one!" he barked. "Flip that one!" Belmont strode forwards and flipped the first card. Joker. The second card, Joker. The final, another Joker. Bewildered, Johander looked at the ratling he held aloft by the wrist. With a sly smile, she flicked the Jack of Clubs into Johander's face as if by magic, followed by the Jack of Diamonds, and last, but certainly not least, she produced the Jack of Spades into her very hand. Then, in a bold voice, she said,
If I could trick you, Johander, of all people in front of your own men, then what makes you think I could possibly be caught stealing from your kitchens?
The gumption of this lass! Johander could do nothing but laugh, set her down, and then shake her hand and declare, "Aha! You're a clever woman, I'll give you that. But you don't fool me. You stole from me. Aha! Yet I cannot prove it. Very well, be on your way. Just know if we think you and your kin are stealing from us, the punishment is death, yeah." Not wanting the death of her kin, Piper came up with a game. If the Wolfhounds caught a ratling stealing, or they thought they did, then they could play a game known as the Hound and the Chicken.
I hate to ask this, but how does the Hound and the Chicken play?
Okay, so it's done in 3 rounds. All right, and what you do is you take your hands and you put them, both palms, anyways, in your hand, like you're praying, right?
Yeah.
So, and you've got like 4 different. It's like rock paper scissors, kind of. But it's a test of speed and figuring out what it is. So it's like you have 4 different notes. You have A, which is where both your hands are like right next to each other. Then you have B, where you slide them to the side, so you make the Aquila. That would be B. C is where you put both your hands palms up, and then D is both palms down. Now the trick is to try to get the other person, and it goes into 2 different rounds, where the Space Marine is playing one round and the Ratling is playing the other. So the way it works is that you start off, whoever starts the game anyway says ready, set, A, B, C, or D. And if they can get the other person to do the same thing that they do with their hands when they get to D, then they win that round. Which, when you win the round, it does. What happens is that you slap the person on both sides of their face, and then you get to bear up and just like full on slap them across the face.
Okay.
So, as you could
I
probably
can
see,
the death of a couple of ratlings just from this.
yes,
One
the Ratling
round.
normally
For
doesn't
just one
survive,
round.
or if they do, anyways, they're very hard-headed. Regardless, anyways, or the Ratling is fast enough, anyways, that it can kind of figure out what's going on and actually win the game. Like I said, there's 4 rounds to it. It's a very hard thing to do against an Astartes, but at least give the Ratling a
after
chance.
The first one, you're pretty much.
Yeah, if you're the Ratling and you lose the first round, you're just kind of done.
Yeah.
But it also, anyways, provides a course of entertainment for both the Ratlings, ironically. The Ratlings come to watch this, and the Wolfhounds, because the Wolfhounds get to slap the crap out of a Ratling, which, you normally don't get to do that. So that's kind of entertaining. And it's entertaining for the Ratlings because they get to place wagers and bets on whether or not, anyways, their Ratling friend's going to die.
Yes.
Oh, it kind of actually works out. In the end, they both actually kind of enjoy this game. The Hound and the Chicken.
Well, weird, just weird, but let's move on, shall we, to the start of this campaign?
yes, let's do that.
Well, like my brother mentioned, Big Toof launched his war and all of its green-skinned forces against Plankonious. According to the big boss's plan, every Imperial troop unit and squad was plastered onto Plankonious to defend it.
Other than the few that remain on Germanica, yes?
Quite right, Sektar. Soon the invasion started, yet things did not go as planned.
Yeah, well, as the rocks and orc ships crashed into the planet's surface, they used the same tactics they had previously done with much success by congregating their troops on a particular part of the main continent. Aiming their rocks for the center of the planet, they missed and sailed to the northeast, but not a single one broke apart. so the orc bosses didn't really care that they were off course. It was considered a success. It turned out this worked in the Imperium's favor, though, due to the geography of Germanica. Now, to cross over to the western hemisphere of Germanica, the orcs would have to either A, pass through the Andes, a mass of jagged mountains that would be all but impossible for their armor and artillery to pass. B, they could cross in the north through the Mangia steppes. But like my brother said, this was the worst winter Germanica had ever seen, and the snow in the steppes had piled up. If the orcs decided to go this way, they would be bogged down, and there would be easy pickings for the Wolfhounds. C, they could head to the deep south and cross the plains of Ohio, but that would take days of marching without fighting. It was agreed that the orcs would most likely take the only well-paved roads through the center at Bastogne.
Pardon me, brother.
Yes.
I forgot to mention that Bastogne happens to be where the Wolfhounds fortress is located, known as the Bastien. You see, Bastogne used to be where the main populace lived before branching off to the northwest. As such, it was decided that the best way to protect the population would be to build their fortress there. This way, if need be, the civilians could be evacuated to the fortress when necessary. As time passed, the population of Bastogne moved to the west and mainly to the northwest to build up a new town that eventually became the capital of Brussels. Yet, the Wolfhounds remained in the slowly abandoned town, and even expanded their fortress into the surrounding town. At this point, very few people lived in Bastogne. Yet, the large towers of the Bastien remained solid, a testament to what was.
Yes, and while the fortress itself was quite large and imposing, what really made it almost impossible to take over through the years was the Ardennes, a large and dense forest full of oak and beech trees, which used to be logged, but seeing the advantage of having a heavy forest at their doorstep, the Wolfhounds have set up a perimeter of no logging around Bastogne. The Imperial commanders agreed with Lieutenant Fernandez and Captain Abrams that they should hold the forest as long as possible and fall back to the fortress only as a last stand. It was a gamble, but they knew that they could bloody the orcs pretty badly before the siege truly began. They also knew that the fortress would have to hold, or the whole world would be done for. While they could help those towns on the eastern hemisphere, it would be as a drop of rain in the ocean. At least here at Bastogne, they had a chance. As they mustered their forces in the surrounding forest, they watched as more orc reinforcements fell from the skies. Hearts began to sink. Chances that they could hold the fortress were small, but if they were going to die, they were going to take as many greenskins as they could. Roads headed east were mined, and booby traps were set in the forest. Czech hedgehogs and dragon's teeth were used to slow down the armor on the roads as well, but even with all this preparation, it wasn't long before the orcs had completely surrounded the fortress of Bastien, and was making its way through the dense forests of the Ardennes. The orc bosses did what they normally did, taking their boys and moving not as one massive unit, but split up with their own troops. So large was this army that it split into 5 groups. The largest group was Claw Squigwigs, who took his 125,000 boys and 7,500 Biggin Squig riders north, and marched past the city, wheeled and advanced on Bastogne from the west. By the time he reached the west point of the city, he had lost about 25,000 boys from traps and lightning attacks by the astartes, mainly the 30 Crimson Fists. Captain Abrams and his men originally spread out as support for all the groups, but moved in to cover Lieutenant Fernandez's retreat back to the Bastien, who was falling back to rearm his 3 squads, and then try to hold the western front from Squigwig's 100,000 snakebite boys.
Sounds like a tall order.
Indeed it was. But if anyone is up for the job, it's Lieutenant Fernandez. After all, the lad has a score to settle with snakebites, especially that one Squigwig. He took his arms. But it was a good thing Abrams moved in behind Fernandez, because Stone-Tooth Jack and his 15,000 Goth Black Orcs came in behind Squigwig to attack the Bastien from the north.
That sounds a lot easier than what the Crimson Fists are up against.
Size-wise, yes. But don't let this group of orcs deceive you. Stone Toof's black orcs are some of the most dangerous Xenos in the galaxy. Now, I'll get to them in a minute, but back to the battle. Peeling south, Jarkin the Gobber took his 26,400 burner boys and 25,000 flash kits. It is here that he meets the Catachan jungle fighters. This is where the most Imperial bloodshed takes place, other than the Eastern Front. Flying straight through from the east, we have the orc boss we haven't mentioned yet, a runt herder by the name of Hasso von Grubben, or Hasso for short. He is trying to roll his 40,000 grot tanks through the roads in the east, but it's tough sledding. Maxwell Taylor and Piper Quickfoot are doing everything in their power to stop the armor's march forward. They know that if the tanks make it to Bastogne, their defense of the Ardennes is over, and they will be stuck defending the fort. Unfortunately for the Harokani and the Ratlings, Big Dwarf is making things even more difficult. Coming in behind Hasso, he has 10,000 grot tanks of his own, and is firing the Orcs' army's artillery, 1,100 cannons, and some new toys that he's anxious to try out. 10 of his very own bubble chuckas. What takes place over the next 6 days is some of the hardest fighting the Plankonious Wars have seen, even now, to this very day. And let's start with the Western Front, shall we, Buxton?
Certainly. As Fernandez had been tracking the Squighog Riders, they jumped from the Bastien to some of the long vacated buildings nearby and waited as the Devastators quickly moved to intercept. His plan was simple. He has the Interceptor squad would jump in and attack, stalling them long enough for the Devastators to get in position to mow down the Hog Riders. This would also give him time to locate his target, Squigwig. Upon finding his quarry, he jumped off the building, shortly followed by the rest of his Interceptors.
Okay, so real quick anyways, or not north, sorry. He's literally jumping off the fortress west to attack Squigwig.
Yes?
Okay. So we've kind of talked about jump packs a couple of times. Not very often. I think actually the last time we really talked about jump packs was when we did Space Wolves, which was a really long time ago. It's really falling with style, correct?
Yes.
You're not really flying anywhere.
No.
Right?
It's a giant jump, basically, is what it's allowing you to do. And then you fall.
So maybe I'm not understanding this really well anyways. He saw, anyways, the Squig Riders coming in anyways from the west. From the Bastien. He, I'm assuming, takes a running leap, jumps off the fortress tower anyways, hits his jump pack, and him and his boys go flying towards Squigwig. Correct? And then they drop down on him?
Basically.
Just out of curiosity, what if Squigwig moved to his left or right?
Well, what happened is first they jumped onto a lower lying building, and then they jumped. So it's not like they just went, I'm going to eventually fall.
Oh, okay.
All right. Like they went from jumping, instead of jumping like a mile or however. Jumping
this makes more sense to me. I was just like
feet or so.
I've been just thinking anyways that Fernandez is like to infinity and beyond, and then he just like leaps off this tower and is like, where the hell is he going? So it's really anyways. He's like they're more like frog hopping, right?
Yeah.
From the Bastien all across these different building tops until they get to where Squigwig is, and then he's really launching himself so he can strike from above.
Right.
Okay, that makes so much more sense. Thank you. All right, what happens when he lands in the middle of it?
Well, Fernandez's timing couldn't have been any better. Well, so it seemed. As he dropped from the sky, he strafed Squigwig and his new hog, blowing away part of Squigwig's side, along with the majority of the hog's head. Knowing he wouldn't have time to reload his spent gun, he dropped it and drew his pistol and combat blade for the upcoming clash with the snakebite. With a roar of pain and anger, the massive orc closed the distance in a flash and quickly swung his choppa down. Knowing full well he couldn't dodge the oncoming blow, he swiped at it with his reverse-held combat blade to deflect the choppa's blade away from him. The choppa easily shattered through the blade itself and almost took the arm with it. His gamble had worked, though. Being able to push the blade off to the side, he took a step forward and pressed the bolt pistol under Squigwig's chin and pulled the trigger. Unfortunately, this victory was short-lived as a stray plasma cannon round vaporized his right leg.
Well, there was only his right leg. Although I'm sure Fernandez didn't see it that way. Also, he must have... I mean, it's funny how combat works sometimes. Especially in 40k. It seems like sometimes these duels last for hours. And then other times, it's just... like that. Which, quite frankly, makes a whole heck of a lot more sense.
Yeah.
I mean, last time, anyways, they fought for a couple of turns. This time, anyways, Fernandez was ready for him. He definitely was ready for him. Which, kind of tells, anyways, how the Crimson Fist work. But, anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, in this case, he was striking first instead of being struck at first.
True. There was no defensive end. This was just straight up assault.
Yeah.
We do not stop until he murders me or I get murdered.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Never mind. Sorry.
Well, he was almost murdered. So.
My bad. Go ahead.
With traditional orkiness, the loss of their leader created immediate conflict amongst the riders, giving the interceptors time to fall back with their injured commander. With a completely open field available to them now, the Devastators could really let loose, with their heavy weapons reaping a heavy toll on the Hog Riders, causing them to break and flee. So, brother, how did things go with the catechins?
I'll get to that here in a minute anyways. Real quick, for those of people that were that have been listening to us for a while, but probably haven't listened to us that long. Because the last time we talked about Devastator squads was when we talked about the Salamanders. Which, if I recall right, was like our third Vox we ever did.
Third series, you mean?
Third series, yeah.
I think so.
So real quick anyways, could you just kind of quickly explain what a Devastator squad is?
Okay,
that way they can kind of understand anyways why the lines are just getting ripped and torn to shreds.
Okay, so the way things go is generally you have your fast attack, your standard troops, and your heavy support. Now, at troop level, fast attack would be like the interceptors, troops would be just like your normal battle brothers, and then in this case, the general one for the heavy support are Devastators. So they are manned with like plasma cannons.
That would be infantry, though, right?
Yeah.
Heavy support would be like tanks, right?
Right.
Okay. But for infantry-wise...
Okay, so they would have like multi-meltas, plasma cannons, las cannons, missile launchers, all the heavy stuff that can shred things to pieces.
And if you're a salamander, heavy flamer.
Yeah.
Everybody else doesn't use those but salamanders. Pretty much. Okay, so yeah. So, to rip apart these lines, because this is really infantry anyways, what are you thinking anyways is in this Devastator squad?
Well, it's at least the plasma cannon.
Okay.
Obviously, they did not arm themselves with a multi-melta since that's short range, and they definitely wouldn't want to do that with the orks.
I'm thinking the rocket launcher, and then... what's the really heavy machine gun the Devastator squad?
Since they aren't a Terminator squad, it would probably be the Heavy Bolter.
The Heavy Bolter? Okay. So, I can see them anyways, just setting up in a position, just like mowing these guys down. But anyways, with the catechins, well, things were going actually fantastically to the west, like you just described. Things were not going well to the south. I mean, it started off well. the catechins using lightning-fast strikes to eliminate squads of burner boys and flash kids, and they disappeared back through the trees. It wasn't long before Jarkin gave up hunting down the catechins, and ordered his burner boys to just simply start burning the forest down. If he couldn't chase down the catechins, then he would flush them out. Colonel McAuliffe growled as he began to smell burning pines mixed with promethium. He figured the boss of the orks would start burning the forest. He had just hoped he would have more time, bleed his army a little bit more. McAuliffe pulled his men back to where his fixed heavy bolters were entrenched on a small hill. Fanning his men out, they melted back into the trees and waited for the orks to show up. As the orks began to ascend up the hill, a rare smile cracked Anthony's face. The first thing rumbling up the hill was a ramshackle baneblade, with a massive orc riding atop it and roaring at his boys to advance. Motioning the men around him, they made their way down the hill just as the heavy bolters began to pour it on the advancing orcs. The orcs whooped in excitement and charged headlong up the hill, surpassing the baneblade, which fired up the entrenchments. McAuliffe winced as an entire entrenchment crew went up in red mist. If they didn't take out the tank, his boys at the top of the hill wouldn't stand a chance. Halfway down the hill, the catechins stopped and waited for the tank to pass them. Then they rushed it. Throwing a grenade at a group of flash kits, Anthony rammed his combat blade through the back of a burner boy's skull, dropping him without a sound. With speed surprising for a man his size, he scurried towards the back of the tank, latched onto it, and then pulled himself up. He hadn't gone unnoticed, though. Swirling his twin heavy bolters around, Jarkin fired. Bolts ripped into the back of the tank as McAuliffe dove off the back. As he face-planted into the snow, he heard the uproarious laughter of an orc on the tank. Rolling to his side, he was up again and hustled to the back of the tank, hiding behind it so that the orc couldn't shoot him. Sheathing his combat blade, the colonel chuckled evilly as he produced a multi-charge from his belt, slapping it onto the underside of the tank's tread, and stopped running. Jarkin was having a grand time. Forgetting temporarily about the human that almost got on his tank, he began to mow down catechins to his left. Even as they ducked behind trees, his heavy bolter just blew right through them. As he laughed in delight, he swiveled around and saw the human that he had just missed that had got on his tank. Aiming his gun, he paused for a second in confusion. The human was just waving at him. Then, just as he was about to fire, he heard a crumping sound, and then his bane blade coughed and began to slow. Looking over the side, he noticed his tread was broken, and his beloved Squisher was unable to move. Thinking this strange human had something to do with it, Jarkin roared and began to fire, but the human wasn't there anymore. Instead, he was moving fast towards the tank and threw a grenade at Jarkin. With a growl, Jarkin ducked into the tank and closed the hatch. The grenade did a little more than ring in his ears as it went off. Grabbing his chop and chuda, Jarkin popped the hatch and bounded out of the tank, ready to hack this human to pieces. McAuliffe was already waiting for him on top of the tank. Combat blade in his left hand, double-barreled shotgun level in his right. With a bark, the shotgun fired, smashing lead into the massive orc who howled in pain. Dropping his Shuda, he charged headlong into the colonel, tackling him off the tank into the snow. In the tumble, the colonel lost his combat blade and just barely held onto his shotgun. Lifting himself to strike, Jarkin thrusted down with his chopper, trying to impale the colonel. Grabbing Jarkin's wrist, Anthony barely held the chopper just inches from his chest. Jarkin grunted in surprise. Few could match his strength, let alone a human. He pushed as hard as he could, yet McAuliffe's arm did not budge. His other arm, on the other hand, was calmly yet quickly reloading his shotgun. Glancing at the gun, Jarkin panicked and lifted himself for a second so he could smash his own offhand into the pommel of his chopper, squishing it into the abnormally strong human's chest. That was what McAuliffe had been waiting for. As the orc repositioned himself, the colonel felt a slight relief, just for a second, and that's when he reacted. Twisting his wrist, he motioned the point of the chopper away from his chest, so when Jarkin's hand came down, McAuliffe was rolling. The chopper dug into the earth all the way to the hilt, and now the colonel used the orc's momentum against him, rolling to where he was on top of the orc now, loaded shotgun pressed against his stubby nose. The last thing Jock and the Gobber ever heard was Colonel Anthony McCall saying one word before he squeezed the trigger. Nuts! With Jarkin dead, things began to break down into pure chaos. Orcs turned on each other and kept at the catechins as well, taking advantage of the orcish animosity. The colonel ordered his men into the fray, and it wasn't long before vicious hand-to-hand fighting took over. If the catechins had numbered more than a meager 5,000 troops, they would have easily dispatched the orc army that now was in shambles. As it was, they were still outnumbered 10-1, and it wasn't long before Colonel McAuliffe had to order his men to fall back. Still within the dense forest, they could hear the roar and screams of the orcs as they continued to fight amongst themselves. The orcs were stopped in the south, at least for now. In the north, things were about to get nasty as Stonetooth Jack and his black orcs came across the 10th Company of Wolfhounds, led by Captain Wilhelm Abrams.
Sektar?
Yes.
What's a black orc? I mean, I've heard of big uns, and of course there's knobs, but I don't think I'm familiar with black orcs.
Oh, well, that's because they have a very small origin. Basically, the Plankonious Wars. Now, after the Battle of Grok's Run, Stonetooth began to have almost a cult following of orcs. Slightly smaller than knobs, these goths dressed in black armor and took on their leader's persona, quiet, grim, and angry. To be one of Stonetooth Jack's black orcs meant that you had to fight your way in through the ranks, meaning only the toughest, biggest, and best boys became black orcs. Now these orcs are running into Captain Abrams and his 150 astartes and their war bikes, who are in turn being backed up by 75 Space Marine scouts. Abrams is fairly young for a Space Marine captain. Being just 150 years old, nobody was more surprised than he that Johander gave him the honor of captain of the 10th. A little disgruntled with being saddled with the 10th, not because he had anything against training the scouts and new recruits, far from it. He got along fine with the youths, better than most of the grizzled veterans, which was why Johander gave him the command. But what frustrated Abrams was he couldn't roll in a battle in a tank. He loved tanks. In fact, there were very few in the chapter that could command a predator better than Wilhelm. But Johander had made his decision, and there were no tanks in the 10th. The closest thing to a tank was a war bike, which he utilized every chance he could. This is also why he was covering the north side of Bastogne, because the forest was thinnest here, and he could use the war bikes to their full potential. He was, in fact, thinking about driving a tank when his Vox channel clicked on. One of his scouts was reporting movement. Gunning his engine, Abrams was on the move, heading to the northwest, hoping to perhaps catch these new orcs on their flank. His scouts were spread out and had the order to fire at will. As his bikers chugged forward, he began to hear more and more clicks on the Vox. His scouts were engaging at will, each click a silent kill from a hidden sniper. Strangely, he hadn't heard any roar or return fire. He knew orcs well enough that even when they couldn't see what was killing them, they would unload their shootas for good measure at anything they thought was shooting at them. As he and his men began to wheel east, they zipped through the forest, picking up speed as they dodged trees. And then, all hell broke loose. One second they were riding towards the orcs, the next they were within their lines, firing bolters and cutting through the orcs with chainswords and smashing through others with thunderhammers. The key to this type of battle was to not get bogged down. As long as they could keep their speed, Abrams wasn't too worried. Their first pass through the orc lines went well. Like a saber, they slashed through, wheeled and came back through again. The second assault went well too, until they reached the end of the orc lines. By this time, the orcs were on to them and were waiting. 5 of his men went down as orcs pulled up lines around trees, catching the rider and slamming them to the ground. These wolfhounds rose as one and began to fire into the orcs, reaping a bloody tally. But these were Stonetooth's own boys, and it wasn't long before the wolfhounds were cut down. They needed a new tactic. Slowing his war bike, he kicked the footstand out and leapt from the bike, bolter aimed downrange. Immediately his fellow Space Marines did the same and began blasting the on-rushing orcs. Barking orders to his 5 squads, they began to fall back towards the south and the scouts, each squad dropping back in perfect synchronization. They repeated this twice, 2 full rotations of falling back. And then he sent a quick order to his squads 2 and 3 to head west and wait for the orks to bypass them. It worked perfectly. The orks did not realize they'd split up, and on Abram's order, the 20 Astarte warbikes roared into the orks' flank again, reaping bloody rewards. This caused the orks to falter in their advance, and Abrams used this opportunity to attack them from the front, smashing the Goths in. Mind you, this was all while the 75 scouts were picking their targets out and taking out any orks they could find in waves. The orks were starting to lose their cool, and Abrams could see it as he rode through them. But that's when he heard a roar that echoed through the forest, so loud that the trees seemed to shiver in terror. And that's when he saw Stone Tooth Jack coming out of the tree line. Stone Tooth had had enough of this fight where he couldn't hit anything. He needed something to crush. With another bellow, he fired his thumper gun at a Wolfhound as it passed by, turning the Space Marine's helmet and skull into a red pasty mist. Seeing this display of might, his boys' resolve returned, and they began to congregate around their boss. Stone Tooth then had his boys deploy their stink bombs and smoky stick bombs around him and the orks, cutting the sniper's visibility to near zero. At least, this would have worked with most Space Marines, but these are Wolfhounds.
Right, they have thermal vision.
Exactly. Unabated, the snipers continued to slaughter the Goths with abandon. Stone Tooth, seeing that the smoke wasn't really helping, began to hack down trees around him with his massive chopper. This did affect the Wolfhounds, as while they see in thermal, no heat on the felled trees. As the bikers began to zip past, they had to slow so as not to crash into the fallen trees, and with their slowed speed, the orks were there, waiting for them. As Abrams came back in, he watched as Stone Tooth hacked one of his bikers in two. And by the Emperor, the ork was not the biggest he had ever seen, but was faster than anything he'd ever fought. Something that big shouldn't move that fast. Regardless, Wilhelm fired his bolter at the ork, who ducked out of the way, but was still not fast enough to be completely missed. 2 bolts caught him on the right arm, but it didn't seem to slow the monster, as it raised its thump gun and fired in Abrams' direction. The captain swerved to the side, the shell crumped into his bike, blowing it up and sending Abrams flying. Crashing into a tree, he landed on an ork that was too stupid or slow to get out of the way. Getting to his feet, he stomped down hard with his boot on the ork's head, squishing it into a gorish goo. Alarms were going off in his helmet. His power pack had been damaged in the attack, and he was running on auxiliary power. The total time his suit was functional was maybe 10 minutes. Maybe. Lifting his bolter, he fired into a group of onrushing orks, cutting them down. As he fired, he began to fall back, not wanting to get surrounded. That's when the ground began to shake. And holstering his empty bolter and pulling his bolt pistol out, he revved his chainsword and grimaced. Stone Tooth was coming. Quicker than a blink, the chopper came in on his left, so fast that Abrams couldn't think, just react. His chainsword came up to block as he aimed his bolt pistol. He was able to fire a single shot before the orc's chopper smashed into his sword, hitting it so hard that it split the sword in two. Yet it deflected the blow just enough not to kill the captain. The chopper still hit Abrams hard enough, though, to send him flying. As he hit the ground, more alarm lights flared to life. He had 4 broken ribs. At least one of them had punctured one of his lungs, and one of his hearts was offline. Staggering to his feet, he pulled his combat knife out and faced the orc again. He was surprised to find that his shot had been on target, and now Stone Tooth's helmet was slightly caved in on the right side. Shaking his massive head, Stone Tooth felt a little dizzy. His right eye wasn't working for some reason, and he barely recognized the Space Marine barreling in on him. Firing shot after shot, Abrams raced in, trying to kill the orc before his power suit failed him, and more importantly, before the monster came to his senses. He hit the orc in the chest with his remaining 7 shots, yet only one seemed to penetrate his armored breastplate. With a leap, Abrams launched himself, knife first, trying to stab the orc in the face. That's when Stone Tooth came to, and his hand lunged out and grabbed the astartes by the midriff. With a growl, the angry orc stared at the marine and began to squeeze. More alarm bells shouted at him as he desperately began to stab the orc in the arm, which didn't seem to bother the orc at all. He could feel his body beginning to fail as the orc was squeezing the very life out of him. With a final act of defiance, Abrams whipped his empty bolt pistol into the orc's face. With an angry and painful yowl, Stone Tooth drew back his arm and launched Abrams off in the direction of the Bastien. The captain flew some 40 feet before he was stopped by a tree, where he crumpled to the ground. His helmet went dark as the power armor finally shut down. Reaching up, he pulled his helmet off. Blood flowed freely from his nose. It really hurt to move, but he was alive. One of his first squad came roaring up, grabbing him and slung him over the back of his bike, barked out an order, and zipped south. Unknown to Captain Wilhelm Abrams, he had actually hurt Stone Tooth Jack more than he thought. The final throw of his bolt pistol had smashed his helmet into his eye socket, and his right eye popped with a loud squelching sound. After hurling the Space Marine, the big orc simply sat down. His boys, seeing he was in trouble, grabbed him and headed north, then east, hoping to find some pain boy who could get their angry old boss back. Now this cleared up the north for a bit, but quite a bit of snakebites had begun to encircle from the west. While they did not advance, they did keep the bottle cap in place, hopefully long enough for a new boss to emerge. The Warhounds were not in a very good position to advance either, with their captain needing medical help badly at the Bastien, and their 50 war bikers were now down to 25. They needed to regroup and rearm. While they did this, the scouts kept good discipline and shot up any snakebite that got too close. For the moment, the northern fringe of Bastogne was the safest, but while this was taking place, how were the Heraconi and the Ratlings holding back the armor, brother? So, for those of you that have forgotten anyways, if I recall right, the advancing in on the east is mainly Grot tanks.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Which is technically armor. Real quick,
Yes.
you want to explain what a Grot tank is? Because they're not used as much as they used to. They're kind of entertaining.
Okay. Imagine a tank except for it was built for goblins.
I was gonna say, imagine a tank that was built in a junkyard by the junkyard dogs.
Yeah.
Except for these dogs, anyways, like engines that go really loud. Normally, anyways, the way, if I recall right, anyways, normally the way that a Grot tank dies is not because it's been shot out from underneath it, is because the engine itself explodes.
Yeah.
It's about 50% of them. So, but still at the same time, they're normally they're rather smallish tanks, correct?
Yeah, they're rather smallish.
So they're a little bit shorter in stature than a Lehman Russ, but bigger than like a war truck, right?
Right. They're and they tend to have things from just they don't really have cannons as much as they have like Mega Blastas or Grotzukas, which are basically we slam metal into the end of a cannon or any sort of projectile.
A big ass gun. That's probably the best way to describe it. What that gun is,
Yeah.
It's just big and it normally makes a boom. Not always, anyways, in the direction they're firing it, but it makes a boom.
Yes.
And this is the main armor group that is marching in from the east, correct?
Right.
Okay. Well, how's it going for the orcs? The rest of them.
Well, you have to understand that by this time news had gotten through that a Cadian flotilla was to arrive and that General George S. Patton was on his way with the 4th Cadian Armor, which would mop the floor with orcs. Oh, and they would also be bringing some actual air support as well. Novel concept in these battles.
Seen any air support in any of them.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, shocking. Maybe it's just simply because the Bastronians don't believe in air support. Or, okay, well, in defense, anyways, of Oxidine,
Yeah.
as we mentioned, anyways, you couldn't get air support in there.
Right.
And then the second battle, I think, quite frankly, anyways, the orcs moved in too quickly for them to really establish air support.
And
then this-
most of the if they were to try to use like planes that were on the ground, a lot of them would be rusted out or have a lot of metal
Right.
missing that may be key parts of the plane.
Because of those
Which
beetles.
is why they
Yeah.
didn't have air support.
And this one, quite frankly, anyways, is because most of their air support, anyways, moved on to defend Plankonious.
Right.
It just seems weird, anyways, that every single battle that we've talked about has had a zero air support to it, though. Which
Yeah.
won't be true, anyways, next time we talk about the Plankonious system. But, anyways, sorry. Carry on, son.
Okay. So all they had to do was hold out till then, anyway. Which was easier said than done. They did have to deal with 40,000 grot tanks under the control of the vile runt herder Hassan von Grubben, or Asa for short. Asa was even more abusive to his grots than
Heisel.
any other runt herder. It was almost as straightforward as Dwarf when it came to tactics. His
Okay.
whole plan was to blast at the Bastien for about an hour and then advance into the city.
Okay, I gotta make mention, yes. We just described what grot tanks are. And yes, they are quite terrible. But there's still 40,000 of them. Keep that
Yeah.
in mind. Against how many did you say, anyways? How many men were fighting against them?
5,000.
And then the, 1,000 Tauros Venators. Yeah.
Yes. And out of those 5,000, they had like 100 what the 10th first and only call tread feathers, which are they aren't really missile launchers.
Huh.
They propel basically at a crack grenade, basically. So they're really meant just to take out tread on
Right.
tanks, basically.
Yeah. But, like I said, anyways, regardless, anyways, this is still 40,000 tanks, and while 20,000 of them will probably blow up by themselves, the rest of them, anyways, are they are armor with
Yeah.
a big gun pointed down at you. So I mean, yeah, it's a heavy push from the east. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
I was worried that people might think, anyways, like they're grot tanks. Yeah, they are just grot tanks, but they're 40,000 grot tanks.
And it's not like these weapons on them are not going to do significant damage just by themselves anyways. I mean, a Mega Blaster can do a significant amount of damage.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Look, the tank itself exploding can do lots of damage, too.
Oh, yeah.
So, anyway, sorry. Go ahead, man.
Anyways, the strategy for fighting the tanks was quite simple. While the orcs approached through the woods, they would be ambushed by the Tauros, which would almost immediately withdraw. Some would circle around and attack again, while others would use the attack to draw the grot tanks into the city. While in the city, the Harakani could direct them into narrow streets that would make movement incredibly difficult, allowing squads of infantry to attack the tanks from blind spots.
Pardon me, brother.
Yes?
I thought, anyways, the concept, anyways, of what they were going to do in combat was they're going to make sure that the armor could reach the city. But it sounds like, anyways, that they're actually wanting them to come down through all the streets. What changed?
Their turn ability was horrific. Their ability to actually go through things in comparison to, like, for example, Lehman Russ being able to basically go through any building. Wanted
Right.
to. These things really couldn't.
Provided it didn't have a basement.
So,
Things go south when you have a basement and you're trying to drive through a house, anyways, with a tank that weighs 50 tons.
Yeah.
You discover the basement really quick.
okay.
So they
Yeah.
found it easier than actually trying to tie them up in the forest. They actually found it easier, or they thought it would be easier to do it within the outskirts of the city of Bastogne.
Right.
Okay.
And of course, it also helps that they were able to put their people on higher floors so they'd be able to shoot down like ratlings. Another method was to wait till they entered a street when they used the Tanth called them tread feathers.
Tread feathers.
to destroy the tank's tracks of the rearmost and foremost tanks, making them easy pickings for the Taros that were in the city. This plan was extremely effective up until the streets got too clogged for the tanks to actually move into the city. You know, there was 40,000 of them.
Keep mentioning that, yes.
Yes. At that point, the Harakani Warhawks had to send out the Treadfeather crews to destroy the tracks of the tanks, giving the Taros easy targets to hit. But all in all, it did what it was supposed to do, and that was to prevent the tanks from taking over the city, protect the eastern side, and create a decent amount of protection from those trying to constantly bombard them into oblivion. Oh, we also can't forget that the damage they dealt was severe. They destroyed an amazing 35,000 tanks and only lost 956 men and 330 Taros Venators. So brother, tell us about the not insignificant contribution the Ratlians attributed to the battle.
Certainly. But before we carry on, like you were saying, things were going well for the Warhawk. Until the remaining Grot tanks started to retreat. And if I'm being honest, a little before they started to retreat. Now, like you said, the Warhawks put together a great plan, but a large portion of the Grot tanks weren't destroyed by them at all.
Really? Then how were they destroyed? I mean, I know Grot tanks have a tendency to explode on their own due to terrible Grot design. But
We repeatedly
it shouldn't
mentioned
be
it, yes.
that big a percentage, now that we mention it.
Dorf.
Ah,
Like you mentioned before, Hazo von Gruben was a rather vicious runt herder, and he didn't like the fact that there was another boss running Grots. I mean, after all, he should be in charge of the puny greenskins, right? I mean, the problem was that orc boss was Big Dwarf, and while he was dumber than a box of rocks, he was huge, and not to be trifled with. Regardless of it was a good idea or not, Hazo kept poking the bear, until on this day, the bear finally woke up. Now Dorf, ironically, was quite content being the artillery boss. He liked being wanted, as well as being around stuff that went boom. I mean, that is a pretty good position, right?
yeah.
The artillery commander is always good. Now, sure, other bosses annoyed him like Munchin Mad Hoffman, but he wasn't here on this planet, and as long as Squigwig told him and his boys where to fire, he was pretty content. Not only that, but he had more boys to boss around. About 10,000 Grot tanks, he got some Grot tanks too, and even the rare commodity, 10 Bubble Chuckas. So, we've mentioned Bubble Chuckers for the last 2 Voxes, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I actually have completely forgotten what Bubble Chuckers do. I know that the orcs love them. And I always kind of love them because I just do remember anyways that they are just downright rather ridiculous, which is one of the reasons why I love orcs. Yuxin, if you wouldn't mind.
So Bubble Chucka is a example of force field technology weaponized by orcs.
It's kind of scary. What does it do?
It fires unstable force bubbles at the enemy that explode on impact. They vary widely in size and solidity. Some like large balls that hit with a negligible strength, whilst others float down like soap bubbles and, after bursting, inflict heavy damage.
Please tell me, by the way, anyways, that when you fire this thing, and I'm like, a guy, anyways, is looking at this like a Terran dude. He's like, oh no, he goes to run away. The bubble sometimes slips into the bubble. It's like sitting there, that's all. So he goes, boom. Everything around him explodes.
That's a gruesome image. That is a very gruesome image.
I know, but it sounds very orky, doesn't it?
Yes.
It sounds like, woo. Boom.
Nothing left of him.
I can see it actually more taking place anyways than like a grot as it's being launched off. All of a sudden, a grot gets sucked into it. What? Well, there you go. Orc artillery. Does it make sense? No. Is it fun? Yes.
Does it work?
Anyways,
Sometimes.
kind of.
Is
Is
it
it very
effective?
scary? Yes. Does it work? Anyways, getting back to Big Dwarf. He was quite happy with the situation until he ran into Hazo. I mean, this puny orc was trying to tell his boys what to do. Sure, he was just kicking grots around. This is not something Dwarf did, and was rather fond of himself. But there were his grots, not Hazo's. His grots. The two orcs were about to come to blows, which really meant Dwarf was about to kill Hazo.
Agreed. As far as boss orcs go, Hazo was relatively small. Or was relatively small.
Dwarf's quite large. When they were given the orders by Klaus Wigwig to march, Bastien, they did. Dwarf did his job, firing into the forest to the east, and then stopping while Hazo's Grot's army charged into the town. This was the part of his job he hated the most, though, when the cannons stopped and he had to wait to advance. And then Hazo's lads started losing, and quite badly. Like you said, bro, Taylor's Warhawks were giving them the what for, and that's when Big Dwarf got an idea. With a slow smile that spread across his face, he roared at his grots, and he fired on the town. It caught both warring parties by surprise, and the devastation was monstrous. Dwarf himself let out a loud chuckle as he heard across the radio the whining of Hasso. Pouring it on, he began to have an effect. Both parties began to scramble for cover, and the Harakani Warhawks and Ratlings moved further back into town, and the remaining Grot tanks and Hazo and his knobs to the forest. Another 500 Warhawks were killed in the barrage, and the Ratlings fared a little better. Half of the little guys were buried in the rubble of the eastern part of the city. Taylor, realizing the game had changed, ordered his Tauros back to the Bastien, hoping to be able to use them later, and then ordered his men to scatter, find cover, and wait for the impending advance. Piper, on the other hand, had other ideas. Taking a squad of about 15 Ratlings with her, she stole out of the burning city and crept through the forest. It wasn't long before she found a broken down Grot tank. So that's what they do. And killing the crew, she commandeered the radio. Knowing Dwarf was pretty stupid, she did her best imitation of a Grot and began to insult Dwarf over the radio. I mean, it wasn't long before she, What? What?
How'd she know Big Bad Ludendorff was there?
Oh, well, because Lieutenant Juan Fernandez. Remember, he was on Oxidine, and when reports came back on who the big boss on Germanica was, he assumed Dwarf and Munchkin, Mad Hoffman, would be with him.
But Hoffman wasn't there.
Well, you got that part wrong. But Piper Quickfoot remembered their artillery boss's name from the briefing of the battle. I mean, it's really actually kind of hard to forget Dwarf. Anyways, she started barking into the radio with her best Grot impression, saying Dwarf was stupid and nothing but a lazy bum. I believe it went something like this.
Dwarf, you stupid squeak snot face ale bilge. I don't know. Dwarf, a stupid big squeak sniffing rock. Has to pick a fight between Dwarf and Grot. Grot would win.
Why?
Because he's smarter.
Dwarf, hearing what he thought was a Grot, and one of Hazo's Grots no less, insulting him like that got his blood boiling. He started roaring into the radio back at Piper. This got Hazo's goat. Sure, it was a dumb Grot, but he's got a point. Dwarf blew up half of his army. This got Hazo on the radio, and he really gave Dwarf the business. Dwarf's response surprised the runt herder at first. There was silence. Not just silence on the radio, but his guns stopped firing. Perhaps Hazo had cowed the orc with his rhetoric? Grinning, Hazo was about to put Dwarf in his place when the guns began firing again, but this time in a different direction. More like into the forest, where Hazo and his remaining grots were. With an angry bark, Hazo ordered what remained of his grot army east. He would crump this miserable dwarf if it was the last thing he did. Firing on his grots? Sure, they were just grots, but they were his grots. If anybody was going to squish them, it was Hazo. Piper and Taylor had a quiet chuckle while they sipped their caffeine from a husked-out tower, watching an epic battle between Hazo and Dwarf. They both knew whoever won would be coming back for them, but this time with one army, and they would probably just pound away at them with their artillery. But for now, they had a brief respite.
So, who won? Or did the Cadians show up first?
Oh, Dwarf won. But it did take him a bit. By the time the scrap had settled, the damage had been pretty severe. Only about 1,000 of Hazo's grot tanks, now dwarfs, survived the conflict, and Dwarf lost 3,000 of his own tanks, along with 35 cannons and, worst yet, 5 precious bubble chuckers. Now that Dwarf was the proper boss, he ordered firing to commence on the town, and that is when, well, Cadian's fleet arrived in orbit. And as the bombs blasted from space, the few that saw it coming made their escape. Big Tooth fled back with his bosses to Mary Jane, while Stone Tooth, Jack, and Dwarf fled back to Oxidine. The Cadian fleet made their presence known, and they made it in a big way. First saving Plankonious and then Germanica. The Cadian Third Army began to chase Big Tooth back to Mary Jane. As they made plan to fall, the rest of the Greenskins advanced on the planet, and before long, a stalemate of blood and bone circled the small planet. It was at this time that Pedro Cantor hopped on his ship, Orksbane, and headed back to the Rin's world, leaving the Wolfhounds to their own devices. Johander was disappointed with his leaving, but understood the Crimson Fist had other battles to fight, other wars to wage. Thus concludes the Plankonious Wars, and moves on to the second phase, which is called the Civil Wars of Plankonious.
Well, on that note, we are out of time.
Yes. Now, we're going to be taking a little bit of a break for the holidays, but don't worry. We'll be back at the end of the year for a special bonus box on the Abyssal Crusade.
Fantastic. But for those of you who enjoyed our little show, could you please be so kind as to push that subscribe, like, or follow button? If you wish to help us expand our work on 40k lore, by all means, support us by joining our membership program on our YouTube channel, Tales of Astartes. Oh, and don't forget to purchase the Yoda Heist, sold wherever ebooks are sold, and Yoda Heist is spelled with a J.
And on that note, anyways, this is Zekthor
And Yuxin.
signing off.